Hello, very beautiful community. Give me a tiny sound check so that I know that you're with me. Let me tell you that I was thinking of doing a Q&A on the stability of the Putin regime, but I've been struggling with breathing quite a bit. And therefore, I thought, why don't we talk personally, where I think I'll still be able to bring you value, but it's okay if I slip up or mix up my words. So let's rock and roll and check if we're hearing and seeing each other. So give me a sound check, beautiful community. You're seeing and hearing me. This is a last moment Q&A, so there might actually be fewer of us here. So more of you will be able to um, get your questions in. I think it's a good way to do it. I really love this ritual we have where everybody who comes early normally gets their questions answered. But I think we're going to try spontaneous Q&A today. So let's rock ourselves and roll ourselves forward. Now, we've got a question about Russian Christianity, but I'm going to be a bit particular today and say we're going to ask personal questions about what worries you, what makes you anxious about politics, or personal questions about me. There are going to be increasingly more ways to ask me questions because I'm now answering questions on Instagram. Go follow me there. I'm now answering questions on YouTube Shorts, and I'm now also answering questions in the community tab on the chat YouTube channel. Let's rock ourselves on. I just apologize to you profoundly if I don't take your question because it's not personal. It's just the rules today. Piotr is asking, how do I go about looking for my authenticity? There is so much bullshit in this culture that I'm not sure what to believe. So the really difficult thing in the culture we live in is that authenticity is arguably the most important value in it, but that authenticity is also the most corrupted value in it. Most expressions of authenticity in our culture are me, self obsession, or consumerism. But that doesn't mean the value of authenticity is wrong. It doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as what it is for Piotr to be Piotr as opposed to for Piotr to be something else that it would be unwise for him to try to become because it's not quite real for him. So there is such a thing as you becoming you between now and the end of your life. And that's not bullshit. The only thing that is bullshit isn't that value of authenticity itself, but how it gets distorted in the basic transactions of our culture, and also how big the stories are that we tell ourselves about how real we are in relation to authenticity when we're very fake about it. Just listen to celebrity interviews, for example. Some celebrities are marvelous, but tendentiously just listen to celebrity interviews. I think that it's very difficult to completely miss one point in response to your question, and that's psychoanalysis. Doesn't mean you got to do it, but it could mean you find out a little bit about what that whole world is about by listening, for example, to Adam Phillips on YouTube, and by practicing a little bit of free association with yourself. Now, most people can't do free association. Most people, as soon as you ask them to do a bit of free association, they clamp up and they become even more rigid than they were before you ask them. But what comes to your mind if you just sit there, right? Right? So, I mean, it's got to be free. So I'm just looking at the white wall. I'm just going to do it for 20 seconds behind me, which immediately just reminded me of the corners of the walls in the room in the apartment in Moscow in the 1980s that I grew up in. And then there was a kind of a pink wallpaper on the wall. Obviously, it wasn't on the ceiling. And so, what were the shapes of that wallpaper? So, what associations do these shapes have for me and my childhood? What else is coming up? Um, well, for goodness sake, I'm just seeing this very weird green, ugly spectacle case. And I sort of grew up next to an eye um, hospital that was actually green in color, a paler green. I like that green more. Why do I like that paler green more? Right? And eventually you're going to stop talking about walls and colors of hospital buildings. You're going to feel something more substantial. Now, moreover, um, a practical trick here is to say, who are the people who really, really love me? And then ask them about it. So for me, it would be potentially my closest friend in the world. I would ask her, um, should I start a podcast or should I do video content? She might say, Vlad, knowing who you are, that's what you should do. So find the 3 or 4 closest people who love you the most, who are committed to you the most, who are close enough to stably criticize you, and ask them about what you're all about. You know, is the career path that I'm currently on exactly me, or is it not so me in your view, my dear close friend? Right. Next, TXNGOTW. I'm from Hungary, and here Mr. Moyar is not a political candidate I like, but I want to vote. I want to act against Orban. What should I do? So let's take this very generically. Um, when you are choosing a political candidate, you're getting on a platform that's got some wheels, hopefully, that's going to take you from A to B. That's it. You don't need to marry people. You don't need to like them. You don't need to trust them. The question is getting on one platform versus another going to get you further away or closer to, right, where you want to go? It's not about you liking. It's not about you loving. It's about, does this step that you might take in offering your drop in the ocean support for a political candidate going to get you closer to the kind of Hungary you want to see or further away from it? So that's how you think about it. Um, and that kind of liberates you. The only exception would be is if you are just by personality a kind of person who just can't compromise themselves, for whom somehow that would be wrong. And then you can say A is very, very bad, B is just bad, but I won't choose B over A because who I am means I can't do politics by choosing things that aren't good. That's okay too. It means that you have a very expressive relationship with politics. Whether that's right for you, I don't know. That is right, in my view, for about 10% of people, not 50. So most people who behave like that are BSing themselves. But there are some people for whom that's genuinely right, who really shouldn't vote for the lesser evil, if you like. You've got to figure out who you are. But if you are like most people, then you basically just say, am I jumping on something that's got some wheels? And is it going to take me a little bit closer or further away from where I want to go? So it's not about, is this the perfect vehicle that I would like to own? No, does this stuff get me a little bit closer or further away from where I need to be? Politics. Politics is very prosaic. It's very practical like that. It's funnily enough quite removed from the earlier conversation about authenticity that we had. La Creme, Vlad, I've heard you mention that you meditate? Is there a particular method that you practice? So no, and I have tendentious respect for certain traditions. I mean, I'm probably going to be very positive if you ask me whether you should go on a 2-week Vipassana meditation retreat. But my meditation is DIY. Um, or if it's not DIY, it's very particular picks from here and there that meet my needs. So, what are my needs? My needs are that I'm very ill a lot of the time, or all the time, in fact, sometimes less, sometimes more. So, I need a meditation that works while you have a lot of physical symptoms. I also need a meditation that works while lying down, um, because, especially at the moment, a fully upright meditation might actually be just physically impossible for me because this is as vertical as I can get since I've got the long COVID, a year ago. Um, and it deteriorated dramatically 4 months ago. I was in hospital and so on and so forth. Since when I can't sit up or stand up. So my personal relationship is all conditioned by my health needs like that. Um, and it's traditional. However, I do think that there is a sense in which meditation is meditation is meditation. And that means that certain things, if you meditate long enough and deeply enough and let go enough, are going to start happening. There's going to be a kind of sense of permeability. And there's going to be a kind of sense of connectedness that will inevitably challenge your epistemic wherewithal if you have a naturalistic worldview, as I do. And of course, I'm not prepared to let it go. I'm not going to have meditation diluted. But meditation absolutely is more than a technique once practiced deeply enough. And I want to perhaps do a separate video to talk about that, talk about how that works. So I suppose if roughly I've meditated twice a day since 2003, you can imagine how many times I've meditated, right? Twice a day for 22 years. More to come on this. I really have been asked about it, and I promise I'm going to say more. Ross, do you think having serious health issues has changed or inflected your thinking as a philosopher? So it shouldn't, especially if you're a moral or political philosopher, because if you get an illness that means you can't work even part-time, you need to work 1/8 time, then you have that for 22 years. Then you get, as I did a year ago, long COVID on top of it. And long COVID sometimes can just be ME, but sometimes is a separate illness, and I'm experiencing it as a separate illness because it's just screwed my microvasculature, which means I can't stand up and I can't sit up. And even though what I really want practically is not to stand up, but to be safe in bed, not to suffocate 30% of the time really badly. And I want to be sustainably present in my wheelchair for 30 minutes at a time, which I can't be. Because if I can do that, then I would be able to make myself cups of tea. And so I wanted a cup of tea before this live. I couldn't do it. I was too ill to jump in my wheelchair and do it. So practically, I want to be sustainable in my wheelchair for more than 10 minutes, and I want to be safe in bed. But while standing is only the third thing I want in practical terms, at a kind of visceral emotional level, it is what I want. Because it's so shocking for me not to be able to stand at all. Because when I was mostly bedbound with ME for some years, I could always stand. I might not stand Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but I knew well on Saturday I'd stand for 10 minutes. To aggressively not be able to stand is very shocking. And then standing for 1 second causes 2 or 3 days of crisis, respiratory distress. So that's very shocking. That's very, very shocking. It's not the most shocking thing in the world. It's not as shocking as being eaten by a shark, but it's very shocking. I'm going to be a bit tough here. If a philosopher who's a moral philosopher, not a philosopher of logic or something, but if a moral philosopher is utterly thrown by that in such a way that it changes the way they think, I think they weren't thinking deeply enough before, they weren't feeling deeply enough before. So you see, my answer is no, because even if you're well and healthy and a shining example of sort of effortlessness in the luck you experience in life, if you're a good philosopher, you'll be able to get far enough into deeper waters such that really being in deep waters for real in life wouldn't be as shocking for you. Now, of course, most professional philosophers will cry like babies if they lose the ability to walk. Um, but if they were better philosophers, they would cry too, but they would be less existentially shocked, maybe. So I want to say that um, it's part of being a philosopher, if you're a social philosopher, that you already have deep imaginative engagement with extreme human experiences. Because if you don't, you're not getting the stuff that you're supposed to be working with properly. By the way, I'm enjoying we're the smallest group we've ever been in alive, which I think signifies both um, uh, that I've been less with you because of health, but also signifies that we can interact more. So I like that. Um, let's see. Oh wow! Oh wow! It's still too much. It's still too much. I'm still going to be an apocalyptic failure in answering your questions. So I'm not going to take questions like "What's the healthiest democracy in the West?" today, but I will later. I'm just taking personal questions today. Um, I'm anxious, Paul is saying, as much as I understand these cycles, I presume you're talking about democratic cycles, we're powerless to stop them, and we're simply along for the ride amid the context of modern amenities and capacity for 100% destruction. So the question is always, what kind of we are we talking about? Um, I think that there are naive ways of talking about we and what we can do about it, ways that are too, if you like, detached from politics. For instance, you might talk about we as humanity, which is a kind of a cosmopolitan naivete. But if you say we, the citizens of a particular country, I'm afraid the answer is a bit more optimistic. You can always change something 1%. I mean, so let's do this now. Um, Historically, our peak audience, returning audience on the main channel has been 250,000. About 15% of my audience are Brits. So we're talking potentially about 30,000 people coming from time to time, interacting with each other. Well, let's apocalyptically shrink this down to the smallest room we've ever had, which is 226 people. Right? 30 people in this room right now are Brits. Between us, we can talk about something to do with UK policy and UK politics, and we can slightly change how we feel, which will slightly change how we not just vote, but how we talk to fellow citizens. And I can tell you that's going to make a small difference. The difference is not going to be enough to inflect anything major, but it's going to be a difference that matters. It's not the case that it matters not at all. It matters a bit. So when we think of making change in politics, it genuinely isn't the case that it's black or white. It's really true that if 30 people gather in a room and then 30,000 people somehow gather, um, they're going to be transformed by their interaction. And that's going to have a transformative effect, however tiny, on their politics. Let's say we're talking about climate policy. Well, climate policy can be 1,000th better or worse than it is now in the UK. That's always possible. So I'm always, for that reason alone, against pessimism. Because if good policy is sort of money in your bank, it's always better to have £100 and one penny than just £100. So I'm going to say that um, a penny at a time does make a difference in politics. Um, can I elaborate on the social forces causing democratic decline? Yes, another time, I promise. Only personal questions today. A beautiful question from an unpronounceable name due to my ignorance. Personal questions: how are you doing? I hope you're okay. Shall we try that? I don't know what I'm going to say. Um, so 4 months ago, I lost the ability to walk or stand or even sit very upright for more than a couple of minutes. But standing, I can't do for even a second. I had the ability to stand more or less all the time for 44 years. For 4 months, I can't. And it's not just a can't, it's hard. It's that if I try for a second, it's extremely violent. Now, of course, for 22 years, I'd already been sick. I'd not been working full time, not even been working part time. But this is a very big shock, very big life event. And I also nearly died in April. So the jump from being healthy to having ME is big, but the jump from having ME to this is big too. Maybe even bigger? Bigger, maybe? Um, so how am I? Well, there is something that I'm just lucky with, and it's something you can just momentarily lose, and that's that I have never had anxiety or depression. I'm also lucky, and this hasn't changed that, right? Losing my ability to walk has not added to my issues in that dimension. I still have zero depression, and um, I, I'm not very anxious. Um, I think that because it's so tough physically, because I'm quite frankly just suffocating 35% of the time in bed, I've only processed the loss of the ability to stand or walk to about a degree of 12%. I have sort of moments where I'm watching a program maybe from bed and somebody's walking and I say, I want to do that. Or I'm planning my wedding and I'm saying, oh, I can't stand if I have a wedding in a year. Or I just desperately want to be able to walk into my kitchen and spend 2 minutes there upright. So I'd give anything for just being able to stand for 2 minutes flat, sustainably. I'd give anything for that. So I'm really wanting that. I want that so much. I want that so much. I want it desperately, but I don't have it. And my doctors are not promising me that I will have it. And I don't have it because of microvascular damage and an oxygen offloading crisis in my cells and tissues. So that feels heartbreaking. And I am mostly, I must say, gentle on the part of me that wants something that I can't have. I'm not mean to myself. I'm not saying to myself, oh, for goodness sake, you know you can't walk or you can't walk at the moment, so just deal with it. I spend a lot of my time wanting to be safe, not better, but just safe. So, for example, I'm feeling relatively safe right now in the sense that my chest situation is well enough right now for me to feel fairly safe. I'm not far from the border of feeling unsafe, but I feel safe. But I spend too much time feeling unsafe in the way that you feel when you have symptoms, which are not just very painful, but they are such that you know that if they dramatize, it's not going to be compatible with life. And that's always things like your capacity to control your breathing, your capacity to control your swallowing, your capacity to remain conscious, and so on. Just extreme muscle pain in your legs is not going to make you feel unsafe. So I just want to be safe. As you also see, it hasn't affected my political calm. What happens when people get sick mostly is that their vision of the world constricts because everything is so hard and everything is so overwhelming. And so you go like that. That hasn't happened to me. It hasn't happened to me because I am not drained by Putin's evil or Trump's imbecility, if you like. I have I'm not a natural participator in politics, but I'm a very natural observer of politics. Observing politics, even if it's bad politics, doesn't get me down. The harm to people that's caused gets me down, but the politics itself doesn't. I'm never say, "Oh my God, how can the world be this screwed?" But I suppose the biggest thing I feel about my health is that I can't orientate myself in what's happening to me because we don't have a clear enough picture of where this is going. Is this going to get better? Is this going to get worse? One idiotic doctor told me it's going to get worse. Um, um, is it going to stay the same? Why hasn't it changed in 4 months? Why can't I stand for 1 second at least sustainably? So it's that I don't have a stable picture of where this is moving, and so that means that you always have to keep sort of reattending to the situation and framing it for yourself because it's so uncertain and so open-ended, if you like. So that's a little bit about how I'm doing um, for now. I was born in the EU and I'm scared of losing it, Janba says. A world without it seems very bleak to me. Well, what I just did before talking to you? Apologies. What I just did before talking to you? Found some kind of video of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. I watched that for a couple of minutes. It was sort of recolorized. And God, it was so bleak that I felt like things were falling out of me. It was so bleak because only 20 years earlier, that country was in with a chance, or that set of countries were in with a chance of avoiding this kind of unbelievable descent into a very destructive political project. So shit happens. The loss of the European Union will be nowhere near as bad as that. What you've got with the EU at the moment is a kind of melting down. And it's not collapse, it's melting down. So at the moment, it's like, "Ooh, can this political structure do anything about Orban?" Well, yeah, it can, but yeah, it can't. So it's kind of like almost pressing buttons, pulling levers, and everything is sort of working, but it's progressively working less responsively. That's the future of the EU. It's gonna work less and less and less and less. And the central reason is that in a massive crisis of trust, legitimacy lies with the nation state. The more distrust you have in our polities, the more Italians and Germans and French folks are going to feel little political affiliation with the EU. But I get the grief. I get the grief. I mean, if you put me up against the wall and said, "Vlad, what's the period of history you'd like to return to or replay or be in just for fun? What's the best time of your life historically, not in terms of what's personally happening to you, but historically?" Undoubtedly, it's 2000 till 2014. And I'd even go further. I would say for me, the most magical time of my life, putting aside my health issues, but just in terms of the world around me, was about 20 2010 to 2005. 2004 sorry, 2010 till 2014 or 2015 to 2016. Let's say 2010 till 2016. So this is already the late period of our post 1989 relative blissfulness and stability. The reason it was so magical is because the old world was still there, but now the internet was making it even more magical. One facet of this, for example, is um, online dating, something that's degenerated now. But in London, there was a deeply European culture of online dating. The world of online dating made you feel like you were in Europe. Now it doesn't. In well, between 99, 2000, 2003, I was doing an undergraduate degree at a university where I went because all my universities rejected me because I did no work at school. Instead of attending my A levels, I chose to sit at home and watch football. And then I repeated a year at school. And then again, I didn't turn up to most of my A levels. And in fact, I got thrown off two A levels, political philosophy and music. So the universities wanted me to come, but I didn't get the grades they needed because I basically didn't attend my exam. So I went to the very worst university on my list that actually itself rejected me and then accepted me. That was the University of East Anglia. I went to Oxford after, but that's because I actually did work during my undergraduate degree, but not at school. And so when I came to UEA, there were two things going on there. One, there was an amazing international development school where there were people from all over the world. It was probably better than SOAS at the time. It's probably the best international development school in the country. And people just come from all over the world, older people, international people, and they just spend some time doing something grounded in Uganda or in Kenya. And then there was also the Erasmus program, which is a program of European student exchange. And I happened to live in a kind of block where they were basically just Erasmus students and me. So these were just postgraduate students from Belgium, Italy, France, Germany, Scandinavian countries. So there is a certain phase. Where am I going with all of this? There is a certain phase of history where things were a bit magical. And I think that's probably from the time the internet begins to change our lives, but before we have the palpable examples of the loss of trust really exploding onto the political scene from 2014 onwards. And it's right to feel nostalgia for that period. That period is politically gone. That period where you could almost relate to Europe as one country, for example, is politically gone. I cultivated a bit in my personal life, right? I don't think I live in Britain. I live in Europe, and I'm sorry, but Freiburg or Lyon are just towns in the country I live in. For me, we're in Europe, and my hero Isaiah Berlin really used to relate to Europe in a way that included both Budapest and New York. But that's rather gone. So there's something that was very magical, relatively safe, that is gone now culturally, and I think we feel grief for it. In my context, the single sort of signpost of grief for it is Brexit, obviously. I'm not a Remoaner. I'm not a Remainer who says that the Leave voters are irrational and morally decrepit. But I am a Remain voter. I'm somebody who voted for the declining European project to be something we continue to stick with in the UK, without any doubt. So culturally, it's a bit of grief. Yeah, it's a bit of grief. And in Europe, what we're losing is really the sense we did have for 10, 15 years that we were one country. And that was magical and created a youth culture in Europe, right? Culture for folks sort of, 18 to 30, 18 to 40, 18 to 50, whatever you want to say, of such wonderful interactivity, interpenetration. Shouldn't use that word given I've talked about online dating, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. This marvelous, effortless fluidity between European countries is gone. Is gone. Um, Even within the EU, forget in Britain, it's not quite there anymore in the same way. Um, because part of it wasn't just can I travel and freely study somewhere else. Part of it is, you know, the cultural sense that you're on some kind of stable unitary political continent and so on. So anyway, there's plenty of grief to feel there, and I share it. Sorry that this was so long. Suzanne says it's disappointing how consumerism and purchases are used so much in how we express ourselves and try to show our authenticity. I guess I mean using brands and labels instead of unique expression. I'm skipping all political questions. Vakusin says, Vlad, I think modern art is a scam by untalented artists, but maybe I just don't understand it. So, the best modern art is not a scam. A lot of it is a scam in the sense that it's crap, but a lot of it is really good. You just need to know how to differentiate. Gilda, I've come to say I love you, Vlad. Please know your friend in California prays for you every day. Thank you so, so much. Means the world. Am I justified in being worried that the USA has changed forever? Yes, the USA has changed forever in the sense that you will never go back to the pre 2016 stability that you had. It's not that things are always going to keep getting worse. It'll go like that too. And there'll be periods where it goes like this in the next 50 years, goes up, um, in some respects at least. But that safe, ensconced period was an historical aberration and it's permanently gone. But most of us can't fathom that that's true. And so most of us are semi living in denial about that. But by the 2030s, we'll be blasted out of that denial. Ruben says, you mentioned that it's a flex for a man to be deeply existentially grounded. How do you begin building it? Well, you begin building it, quite frankly, by being free. And that might mean different things for you. It might mean that you figure out whether you need or don't need therapy. If you need therapy, you've got to get the right kind of therapy for you. Some therapy modalities suit some people more than others. So it basically, the starting point is, am I screwed up in some way that I'm not acknowledging? And if I am, I've got to challenge that. I've got to tackle that. And many people are surprised when they discover they're actually a lot more screwed up than they think. So, for example, I'm really very free now. I wasn't always, but I was always free of anxiety or depression. And that, when I was in my 20s, would have made me feel, oh, I don't actually have any psychological issues to work on. I was wrong. I did. I did. So it's also important not to deny that you've got issues just because you don't have the conventional issues that everybody talks about, which is, am I depressed? Am I anxious? But basically, you can't really be screwed up if you want to be grounded. So the first thing to do is you've got to work on your screwed upness somehow. And beyond that, you've got to have a nuanced relationship with the self-help culture. You've got to take some things from it, but also avoid taking all the crap from it. I mean, there's too much build up your body, um, build up your bank balance advice, which can still leave you being a small boy with cash and muscles. So that's the problem with the manosphere today. There are a lot of small boys with cash and muscles who are babies, who, if you put them in some kind of difficult emotional situation, would just tumble like a bunch of like a pack of cards. So that's probably 17 tips. But the first tip is you need to work on your issues in the best way that fits you. And second is you got to draw something from the self-help culture that's constructive, but avoid its downsides. The reason I mention the self-help culture is that while 99% of it is crap, there are good things to draw on because there's so much out there. And so it's not true that it's all something you should dismiss. And then you could um, ask yourself some questions about authenticity too. That's part of not being screwed up, I suppose. But what do I love? What do things matter? What are the things that matter to me most? How do I stand in proximity to them? And what does this question of what do I love mean for how I treat other people? People who are very close to me and people who are less close to me. Brilliant question, story man. Why don't people stand up when the political establishment acts against their interests, but not for our personal Q&A today? Hey Vlad, I'd like to know if you like ghost stories or horror movies. Because of my health, I consume only a very limited amount. Thank you so much, beautiful sweetheart. Um, my partner's arrived from the countryside and made me a cup of tea. Um, very nice. Um, so I have very limited time for health reasons to um, consume trash. But if I do consume trash, I love um, sharks, shark attack stories, or like stranded at sea stories, or some kind of natural disaster stuff, documentaries about that. Um, so that's the kind of trash that I consume. I don't know where the shark stuff comes from. Maybe it's from the time I lived in South Australia, the time I lived in Tonga, maybe before. Um, I don't really do sort of fiction horror movies. I mean, the last time I saw a horror movie was actually in 2005. I saw one of the Saw films. I liked it, but it wasn't yeah, it wasn't something I replicated. So I don't really sit around watching horror movies. I think that I could watch one genre of utter trash, and that would be post-apocalyptic films. So human beings living in the forest after the apocalypse. If I literally am just borderline well enough to consume something, but I'm just not well enough to consume anything meaningful, that could be something I watch. But there's such a big part of me that no matter how ill I am, will want to say, "Well, Vlad, just listen to some Schubert, for goodness sake," you know. Michal is talking about anger, about politics affecting personal life. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has spoken quite a bit about anger in our culture as a constructive and unconstructive force. Um, Basically, what I would tell you is some anger is okay. If I walk into a room and a woman in that room is being a bit silenced because she's a woman, I'm going to be angry. If some boys are doing it, I'm going to say, boys, misbehavior. Don't misbehave. Stop it. Right? So anger can be appropriate um, or inappropriate. So make the distinction in your head between constructive and unconstructive anger. Know that some anger is constructive and fuels even constructive action, and other anger is not very constructive. So know that difference, explore that difference. Not a difference you know by saying, boom, that's exactly where it is. It's a difference you explore. Um, the second thing, figure out what level of anger is right for you. Are you someone who gets angry when you see bad things? Or are you someone who gets angry when you see bad things done by people who should know better? That's a very common distinction. A lot of people just don't get angry when somebody's doing bad things who just won't know better or just has no chance of doing better. So, for example, a lot of people just won't be angry at Putin because it's not as though Putin could reflect and become a Scandinavian social democrat tomorrow. But you might say, well, um, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer should do better, knows better on political issue X. So explore what is right for you in terms of anger, and then realize that a lot of the anger you feel isn't right for you. And why is that? Explore that. Dive Plane says, my theological beliefs influence my politics. Is this normal? Well, in principle, of course. But it depends on how and whether it's constructive. There is a certain kind of social reality in the modern world, and that is that we have an immanent way of relating to politics, as the beautiful Charles Taylor would say. That's to say that there are many ways we relate to politics that are just independent of our relationship with God. And that wouldn't be the case several centuries ago. But you see, whether you are religious or not, in the West today, you wouldn't read most policy positions off that. You'd read some, but you wouldn't read most. You wouldn't read your climate policy of your religious convictions. Um, so that's one thing. I mean, there's just a degree of separateness that is all about how secular the religious people in our culture are. It's a degree of separateness between politics and religion that's to do with how secular the religious people are. So it's not how few religious people we have in the world, but how secular the religious people in our world are. But having said that, of course, even in this world where we have this immanent way of relating to politics that is direct beyond our relation with religion, it's still the case that there's an interpenetration between the two. And somebody like John Rawls coming along and saying, try to abstract your religious beliefs from your political convictions, is offering us a very interesting experiment. It's going to teach us a lot about us, but it's not politically practical, and it's in fact tyrannical. Um, so it's absolutely okay for you to be guided by your faith. Um, the question just is does that happen constructively or unconstructively in your case? But it's absolutely okay that you're jumping on certain wagons politically, if you like, where others are there for their reasons and you're there for your reasons. You might say, well, I've jumped on this particular policy wagon, and some of that is to do with my relationship with my faith. But other people share this policy position with me for reasons that have nothing to do with faith, and so on. So it's normatively impeccable, but how it works in your case is where the issue is going to be, where we're going to figure out whether this is working for you constructively or unconstructively at the moment. And of course, I've lost my spectacles, but doesn't matter. I have a second pair. Oh, I found them again. There we go. Suzanne, happy Sunday to you. And thank you for being here. Vlad, love your work. Historia Medicorum, fellow ME patient here. Any advice for someone focused on family safety over activism in the coming turmoil? Move to an island. So the real reason to move is nuclear war risk. Nuclear war risk is lower now than it was in 2022. So you don't need to move for nuclear war risk. There's another reason to move if your country is placed near a difficult hotspot. So, for example, I'm taking questions now on the tab tag section of the chat channel, and somebody's asked, Vlad, I'm in Estonia. Do I emigrate in case Putin does something? And so there are then questions like that, and you have to make an objective analysis, and I will be answering that question. But then what you've got to admit is that the democratic decline we're dealing with in the West is ubiquitous. You can't move from one country to another and avoid it. There isn't that much point in running away from Trump to Europe if what you want to avoid is Trumpism, because Trumpism is coming to Europe too. It's just an election cycle behind. So that's the answer. I do think some countries will be in a better place than others. Um, I think that can sometimes justify a move, but I'm skeptical about that. I'm skeptical about that because I think that we're dealing with a kind of a global wash of democratic destabilization. So it's not very easy to avoid it. This raises another question. Do you sort of emigrate within and become a kind of prepper if you can afford it, living in the countryside in a self-sufficient way? That's predicated on your opinion about societal collapse. I have a friend and a colleague, Rupert Reed, who has different relationship with the climate crisis to me, and I think Rupert probably thinks that I could get him on to talk about it. We'll get him on to talk about it. Because we're meant to, just never happens for health reasons, to co-write something about climate discourse, partly because we disagree with each other, but to write one thing together will be quite compelling because it's two people who disagree arguing for the same thing together. But he fears societal collapse in the West in the next couple of decades, and I just don't. I fear democratic collapse. So this partly depends on how you estimate the risk of societal collapse too. But what I would say is that a lot of our utter panic about what's happening is a product of the fact that we've come out of this relatively peaceable, stable democratic bubble, and we're entering real history again. And we're still in relatively shallow waters. And so what will happen, funnily enough, is that as things get worse over the next 10 years, some of the panic will subdue because people will recalibrate their expectations. So I would say, rather than move, stay wherever you are and just try to be a good citizen. In most cases, that's the right thing to do, and challenge the toxic bullshit that post-truth authoritarians are just pushing you away. Paul, did you hear researchers have discovered what I think was the mechanism, or at least some of the genetics associated with long COVID? Yes. Nobody has discovered the causes, or the true causal mechanism of ME or long COVID. We've discovered a little bit more of a genetic association with an excellent study in which I participated. I gave my saliva for that. It's really excellent in grounding the reality of ME. But it's an important and very helpful piece of research that doesn't fundamentally change the patient picture or patient experience for the years to come, unfortunately. So that's the ballpark we're in. Um, if you pumped, so there's there's 400,000 people in the UK with ME. And then there's people with long COVID. Some of them are just in the ME box, some of them are not. So it's on top of that, there's another couple of 100,000 who are profoundly ill, who have profound microvascular damage like me. And then there's up to 2 million who have some kind of residue of post-COVID impact. But we're basically talking about a ballpark figure of long COVID plus ME in the UK of something like 500,000 people who are profoundly affected, which is a lot. We could fix them, probably. Like you could make me stand, probably, if you pumped 10 billion into this globally and spent it effectively. We're just not doing that. Until we do that, these people are going to stay sick. We're losing annually more money in big democracies than it would cost to fix this. The cost of my illness in the United States is in the tens of billions annually to the economy. So fixing it is much cheaper than having it. But we are not engaged with sort of collective rational agency here. Birds aren't real is asking about political book recommendations. I promise I will give some, but today we're speaking personally. Let's jump into super things I have missed. Do you actually pay, Jason is asking, do you actually pay taxes to your adopted nation? Or is it just men like me that actually pay taxes so that men like you can live in freedom? I'm not sure what you're driving at here, but you sent me $50 for that. So, um, well, I mean, I was a child when I came to the UK. I was 12, 13, just about to 13, and I lived 4 years before that in Israel. So, um, I am working in the UK. I'm paying taxes in the UK. Um, um, I've been I've been a resident obviously for longer, but I've been a British citizen for 25 years. The only thing that's kind of special about me is that I'm not on benefits. But that's because I'm in the weird position that I do two things that allow me to have some money coming in. Not enough, but allow. And that's because I do consulting, very small number of hours, and I do this. So yes, I'm paying taxes, and nor am I on state benefits in the UK. Is that what you wanted? Not sure what you wanted. That doesn't. I mean, either you wanted something rational behind what you expressed, or you've asked a fairly fashy question. Like who would I be paying taxes to? Russia, Ukraine? I've never been a Russian citizen. Um, Israel? I mean, who am I going to send my taxes to? I suppose Google is an American company, but the current arrangement is that you can work with Google by paying tax in your country rather than in America. Rachel, is all of the UK European or just London? You know it's neither or, but you and I being crude together, right? So it's just London. The kind of Europeanness I'm describing is just London. In the sense that I had more German than British friends in London. So that's just you're not gonna do that in Newcastle. Um, you shouldn't underestimate how international the rest of the UK now is, but still London is a country within a country. The other thing I would say is that the European multiculturalism is much shallower in the UK once you leave London than it is in European countries once you leave the capitals. So there's many more European cities and European countries than there are in the UK. But that's changing little by little. But yeah, I mean, you have to admit that London's a country within a country. Um, always reason or always something. Um, for relative peace in the second half of the 20th century, our grandfathers had to remove millions of Nazis. I feel like that's possibly the natural state of incentives, that we've just been delusional about our duty. Not sure quite what you are saying, in the sense that I don't think that the current um, political toxifiers coming our way are going to be like the ones we faced in the middle of the 20th century. Um, they're going to be different, and they're going to be keen to give us much more private freedom, less public freedom, but much more private freedom than these folks gave. Um, so it depends on what you mean. But I suppose the power in what you're saying is just how extraordinary and how devastating what we had to deal with was in the 20th century. And that can remind us how big political challenges actually get, and can remind us also what it means for human beings to feel hopeful when things don't go well, knowing that other people manage to feel relatively grounded and hopeful in the past through even bigger challenges. Um, Hi, Vlad. Um, Big Hoth 98. Younger generations feel anxious. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, this is um, the current generation of young people is so anxious. And I don't buy the story. Guys, get over yourselves. It's not like you're in Berlin in 1946 trying to make a life. Um, but you say AI devalues degrees, homes are unaffordable. That's really big, by the way, because when you can't own a property, um, on an individual level, you can say, yeah, rent. So for me, psychologically, it's so, either is fine. I don't feel dislocated if I'm renting. But um, I think on a collective level, too many citizens just completely not being able to afford a home of their own are just not going to feel they're part of society. So that's the real. So it's not the um, economic injustice that ruins us when people can't afford to buy property. It's the fact that you don't feel like you're part of society if you have no chance of buying property. Um, Homes are unaffordable, life is commodified. I sense a shift left economically, right socially. That's correct. And indeed, the entire political spectrum, at least at the level of rhetoric, is moving left economically, right culturally across the West. Um, do you think a new centrism can emerge? Oh gosh, that's where you're going. No. The centrism that is dying now, which I call sort of mid 1990s neoliberal technocratic centrism, that's gone. It's still there. It's the primary force in our politics still, but it's gone in the sense that it's on the way down irrecoverably. Um, the politics of somebody like Keir Starmer in the UK is going down. He is the prime minister. He has a big majority, but his politics is going down. It's not going to be possible to get that kind of majority on that kind of politics in 5 years. Uh, Something new needs to emerge, Now, you could say, Vlad, I still want to call that centrism. I prefer to say it's something that's not centrism, because when we think of centrism, we think of, the kind of politicians that are popular, that are in power now, but becoming less popular. So that new emergent politics, if it comes, is going to be a bit mixed. It's going to be a bit populist. And I'm not comfortable to suggest that centrism is going to be the best tag for it. Alex, hi, Alex. Um, at what age did you decide you'd be a political philosopher? How did you get there? So, um, when I was 16, um, 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 when I was 16, um, for the first time, I read a small piece by an Oxford academic, and I said, look, across 99% of contexts, I'm not allowed to criticize professional academics at my age because I just can't know that I know better. But there was some specific objection I had that felt available enough to me that I said, okay, this is the first time in my life I'm going to say that an Oxford academic is wrong. So I developed this very prosaic intellectual confidence around the age of 16. And sometime between 16 and 17, I articulated to myself this other confidence, which obviously is going to sound egomaniacal, but I recognized I would be one of the best philosophers alive if I became a philosopher in any reasonable historical milieu. And so I had that sense, which hasn't been realized because I haven't done the work. So it's a bullshit sense at the moment. It's just at the level of talent, with practicalities or health allowing or not allowing. Um, so between 16 and 17, I articulated something I'd already been doing for a couple of years, which is working on my talent for developing my talent. As a teenager, I was completely uninterested in writing the the novel, the teenage novel, or composing a piece of music or writing poetry, because I felt I wasn't remotely ready to produce anything. I needed to work on my talent and on my talent for developing my talent. And between 16 and 17, I articulated to myself that that's what I was doing. And as I articulated the way I was working on my talent for developing my talent, I realized that I was good. I realized that I was not very good compared to great philosophers, but I was good compared to what I needed to get done. And so when I arrived at university, and of course I carried this in a much more cocky and absolutely humiliating way than I do now, but when I first arrived at university, I didn't regard my lecturers as superior to me, and I tended to um, I tended to um, at a minimum. No, that's a lie. Put myself on an equal footing. I thought I was 10 times more intelligent than any of my lecturers, right, when I arrived at university. And so that sense had already been there for a while. And then it socially materialized, right? When I submitted papers as an undergraduate student, immediately the response wasn't good, Mark, but oh my God, this is publishable. Would you have lunch with me? Right. So that came through a little bit. And then much the same happened, when I went to as a postgrad to Oxford. And I remember this wonderful comment from what would have been my favorite teacher there, Alan Ryan, a philosopher, who said, I wish I was, speaking about himself, just 2 tiny degrees smarter, so I could do philosophy quite as well as Bernard Williams and Richard Wollheim could do it. So I was conscious of all of these gradations of quality, and conscious about where I was myself roughly at the level of talent from between the age of 16 and 17. I rated myself extremely low to the height of possibilities. I still have a rating for myself as a philosopher at the level of potential. I rate myself between let's say 2.7 and 3.7 out of 10. 10 is the pinnacle of philosophical work. But that's pretty high. That's pretty high. Um, and so that sort of uh, sense of reality, or you might tease me, egomaniacal absurdity, developed between the age of 16 and 17. So something like that. Comrade, I'm an engineer by trade in the US military industrial information space. How can I navigate my despair for my country's foreign policy with my career? And Gaza keeps me awake at night. Well, you're a good person. Good question. Um, with the military industrial complex, and with the military in particular, including with soldiers, I do recommend ethically making a big distinction between um, uh, justness of war and um, justness of prosecution of war. So you could say something like, a lot of US servicemen in Vietnam behaved remarkably, but that war is a calamity. And that they're compatible things. Um, so where I'm going with this, and another set of remarks I'm not going to fill out now, is that there is a dignity about soldiers, um, uh, not in all wars, of course, but in some wars, even if these wars are not themselves good wars at all, to be partaking in. Um, if you have anything to do with the military of a major Western power will be used for good and for ill. It's not in your hands. So what I'm saying is a kind of, and I don't want to advocate an absurd level of compartmentalization. I just do what they tell me, and that's the right thing for me to do. But I also want to say there is an ethics and a dignity in um, uh, being a soldier, though you're not a soldier, but that's what we're talking about. That that goes beyond just, should we be involved in this or that particular war? Um, One thought. Second thought. All U.S. citizens. I can see Adam Ragusea is here. Adam did a beautiful video about it. All U.S. citizens are a bit associated ethically with what is happening with Gaza, just because of the massive support the United States offers Israel. I am associated with it, even though the UK is a speck in the ocean comparatively in what it provides Israel. So it's not just you, there are gradations, right? All US citizens are responsible, not guilty, of course not, but responsible by association for why we've got tens of thousands of people mass slaughtered for no good strategic reason by a country whose rampage is completely unaccountable. So there are gradations. It's not just you. Are you closer if you're working on stuff? Yeah, yeah. But what you are never going to be able to do is do some kind of utilitarian calculus whereby you put it all into some kind of bowl and swish it around, and then an answer comes as to whether you're just on the right or on the wrong side of being able to, on the right or the wrong side of being able to carry on doing what you're doing. Um, uh, so this is going to be in large part a matter of intuition. And like a broken record, I'm just going to break that intuition up for you into two bits: expressive and um, uh, effective. So, for example, um, let's say I'm asked to, I don't know, co-author a paper with an Israeli academic. What am I gonna say to that? Well, I know what I'm gonna say to that. Obviously, yes. Um, Somebody else might say, well, um, expressively, I want an academic boycott of Israel. It just doesn't feel right. And I want an academic boycott of Russia. No, I think that's I like expressive politics up to a point, but I think that's going too far. Because, for instance, some of the best critics of what Israel is doing are Israelis. Um, or you might say, well, no, I am going to make a decision about whether I should co-author this paper with an Israeli academic on the basis of whether it's actually going to help people in Gaza or not. And on that basis, it obviously won't if I boycott some kind of Israeli academic with whom I might go write something. So I might say, "Oh, I'm going to do it." So when you do this instinctive thing, figure out what's expressive and what's practical. Like, if I stop doing this, what's the actual difference going to be in practice, right? But then also put in whatever expressive element um, matters. Um, uh, Adam Ragusea. Could constitutional conventions help restore our democracies? Should the next US president invite state delegations to get together and renegotiate our settlement, our national settlement? I'm going to email you about this because it's a brilliant question, and we're gonna keep this conversation on uh, the personal topic. Um, Not sure I'm the best person to answer it because all of my thinking is just going to be what is it better for democracies that are increasingly flailing and polarized to do? And in some ways, the US is a bit unique as a democracy um, uh, because it's so multi-layered. But I'll definitely give it a go. Um, the more going back to watching stuff. Um, um, I have watched more Adam in the last 4 months actually, um, because, um, I'm often in a situation where I can't produce with my health. So I've watched more Adam Ragusea. I've even rewatched a few things. The Oh, come on, come on, what's the thing? Keith Floyd. Yes, I've watched twice the Keith Floyd video you did a while ago. What's nice about you, Adam, is that you're even when you do the thing on you do culinary content, gastronomic content, it transcends a bit into cultural commentary, which is very, very beautiful to see. Jack, thank you. Jason, please support my work by asking me questions like this. Thank you so much. At least he answered my question about whether he's paying taxes in the UK. Let's see who can afford to pay more for nothing. You've left me lost again. You've left me lost again. But you've got to behave nicely. Because if you keep sending me money and not behaving nicely, then we're gonna ask you to not send me money and not be here. So please behave nicely in the future. Okay. Um, let's do 12 more minutes. We've done the super thanks. Let's do 12 more minutes. Um, mm, Nick Cooper, do you know Mark Galeotti? Yes. Well, we're not good friends, but we agreed to have a coffee at some point that for health reasons hasn't happened. But we also spent time chatting on my main channel on a few months ago, um, before my major health collapse. and Mark will be back whenever there is an opportunity for us. Um, One of the videos is about NATO and Putin, and the other is about algorithmification of our war commentary. Rachel has deleted Jason's comment. Well done, Rachel. Somebody is Vasil is reblogging my ratings for academic philosophers, where I rated Plato 9 out of 10, higher than anybody. The reason I did that with Plato is because Plato is an utter freak at 7 or 8 different things. So some philosophers are freakishly writers of genius. Some philosophers have an extraordinary capacity for imaginative self-extraction, like Nietzsche or Wittgenstein in another sense. Other philosophers have an unbelievable capacity for rational systematicity, like Kant. You name it. Plato had the full Monty. He was an unbelievable freak. Normally, human freaks are freaks in one dimension, but Plato was a freak at about 8 dimensions. Unbelievable. What is my relationship with math? Appalling, appalling and disgraceful. I'm an extremist. I am very uninterested in things I'm uninterested in, and very interested in things I'm interested in. My blind spots are just comical. Vlad, do you listen to popular music? Yes, I listen to quite a bit of popular music, but it's often for um, a tiny bit for rejuvenation, but it's almost all for sociological consumption. I'm interested in how it works as a product, but almost all my serious listening is classical music. But I'm interested. I'm always interested. I don't want to miss out on, you know, fully understanding a phenomenon like Lady Gaga, for example. Well, funnily enough, Lady Gaga is extremely musically talented and is one of the most rhythmically talented, is as rhythmically talented as any pop musician in the West. Being Lisa. I'm going to read more Plato now. Wow, incredible. Miles Bernier is a wonderful guide if you ever need a guide to reading Plato. How do I rate Slavoj Žižek as a philosopher? I rate him very highly. He's 10 times better than me um, at public communication that resonates. But the question is that there's a certain kind of paradox with Žižek, namely that he's a critic of our culture while also being himself an instantiation of the thing he's criticizing, because his presentation is more, in my view, sadly or happily, I say happily, but some people would say sadly, a commercial product than a serious reckoning for us, a serious invitation to reckon with who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. So he is an intellectual entertainer of genius with also a lot of sophistication. His position on Ukraine has been excellent. But also, of course, some of Zizek's heroes are very much not my heroes. I mean, he and I are very big on psychoanalysis, but Zizek is very big on Lacan, and I'm not big on Lacan. Let's do 5 more minutes and see if we can come up with any personal questions about you or me. Vlad, do you have an opinion on video games as an art? That's for another time. Video games are not an art. They're something else. You could call them a craft if you're masterful at them. You spoke of being mentally free because of psychoanalysis. How has psychoanalytic reflection freed you? So I did 5 years of psychoanalysis between 2013 and 2018 when my analyst died. Um, and I came into it very much not sure that that's what I wanted, because what I really felt I wanted was um, just somebody much older, preferably maybe even a woman, who would just ground me, be empathetic to the huge illness, health challenges I was dealing with, but also, but also um, be tough on me. Vlad, you're sick. Things are tough. Get your act together. Um, but instead, I basically walked into psychoanalysis, and it was probably 2 years before I got going with it. Um, and we have lost the picture here for some reason. And I'm sorry about that, but let me know if you can hear me. And I'm just going to finish my answer. Um, or maybe even get the picture back. Oh, what's happened is that my phone has died. So, can you hear me? Excellent. So, I'm going to just get my picture back up, possibly, while answering this question. So, what happened was that I was completely unready for that kind of modality, but it turned out to be everything that I needed. And I was also skeptical that I needed much because I was never anxious and never depressed. So, what could I have to work on? I'm just somebody who's dealing with a really difficult illness, who has very big career ambitions, but is very ill and can't fulfill them, and just needs to be talked through that ongoingly and supported through that ongoingly. Instead, I went on a very big and magical journey um, that was a lot of fun. And I'm just getting the picture back now. And let's see. Thank you so much for for indulging me. Have we come back? We've come back. We have come back. Brilliant. So that was a wonderful surprise. I wasn't ready for it. And what was so marvelous was that I got incredibly lucky with this man. Um, uh, he was in his 70s, as it happens, dying from cancer. He was basically trained to a professional degree in philosophy, even though he was a psychoanalyst. And he knew people I knew, not just um, followers of Wittgenstein, but also philosophers who meant a lot to me, like Bernard Williams and Richard Wolfheim, deeply interacted personally with these people. Then he had an extraordinary relationship with classical music, whereby in the first few years, and of course you're lying on the couch, you're not seeing the analyst, he would often um, make detailed references to scores, and I could never respond properly because I always responded with a musical analysis. But that's not what one was after, of course. And it was only after some time that I could do free association responses. But he would often say, "Now, there is, of course, that descending passage in bar 77 on in this Schubert sonata. Um, I wonder how you feel about it." And for the first 2 years, I would say, well, this is what Schubert is doing there, and I'm very moved by it. Eventually, I got over that. Um, it's the dynamic which is only the second biggest in my life for laughter. The most I've ever laughed was with my friend who died in 2011, my dear close friend. But the second biggest degree of laughter I ever had was in these sessions. And there were some ways in which I needed to free myself, and indeed I did. So it's one of the great gifts of my life, and it's remarkable that he wasn't just one of those psychoanalysts who is probably one per city, that good. There's one in New York, one in Paris, just of that level of quality. But he also had this unbelievable overlap with me around music and philosophy, which was just bizarre. Um, and I was deeply moved by it as a ritual, because it's one of those rituals that the more you reflect on it, the more beautiful it becomes. Whereas normally, when we reflect on rituals, we desacralize them, we emaciate them, we alienate ourselves from them. So the psychoanalytic dynamic is the only ritual, in my judgment, in the Western world that is fully culturally intact. It's an elitist ritual because you need to have the time and the money for it. And I didn't do it as frequently as would normally be the case, because exceptionally he made an exception for health reasons that I would come less often. Um, so that was that, and I probably would have done 6 or 7 years if he hadn't died. So I was close to the end anyway, but it was 5. And one of the great unexpected gifts of my life. Just incredible. Could I have given all of that to myself without that work? Maybe yes, but with a big delay. With a big delay. Would have taken me longer. So, oh my God, amazing. So, let's just take one more question to round ourselves out. And this is one of the tragedies of therapy, unfortunately. The need for quality therapy is much greater than the human possibility, um, to uh, generate high quality therapists. The Ragusea loves the chickens. There are also the owls over there. Only pigs are missing. My favorite animal. Only pigs are missing. Picton has fallen. No, Picton is over there. Picton is the hospital pig. Just fishing for one last question. Being Lisa, yeah, I was just incredibly privileged to have worked with. I mean, I said how amazing this man was musically and philosophically, but also he was completely immersed in this post-Kleinian world. Knew all the people like Donald Meltzer, so it was wonderful. I'll talk about Lacan if you want my views on Lacan. Search for Richard Volheim on Lacan in the New York Review of Books. There is always new music, asynchronicity in the classical space. I like. I'm so big on that. We have incredible music being written in the 90s, for example, that in the 80s, that is at a distance from the culture such that we don't say easily, oh my God, this is as good as Schumann, but it is. Um, okay, last question. Total narcissism, uh, invitation into the most abhorrent and apocalyptic narcissism, but let's just deal with it. It's a question that's been asked already, so I'm not sure if I can try to give something new. Do you think Russia deeply impacted the way you think? And if so, how was it different? Cindy. Okay, let's end with this. Do I like Jordan B. Peterson? I'd like to give Jordan a hug, but I don't like what he's doing or saying. Um, mm, so one of my questions is how Russian is Isaiah Berlin? One of my intellectual heroes as a public intellectual, as an essayist especially. Um, so what's Russian about Berlin? Berlin is mostly not Russian, but there's some Russian things about him. One of them might be a kind of aversion to systematizing thought. And another one might be that he was so terribly self-conscious, Isaiah Berlin, and insecure, but he had also an unbelievable capacity for being completely organic and unself-conscious in some domains. It's very difficult for a Western person to generate. I have none of that, quite frankly. So Isaiah was more Russian than me. Now, I think the answer to your question about me is, and so as I came at 12, I left at 9. So you see, I came to the UK at 12, 13, but I left the USSR at 9. And so now my thought can't be easily translated from English into Russian. And I feel constricted when I speak Russian, which is almost never. I consume a lot of content in Russian, writing and speech, but I don't speak in Russian really. So I think that I am very unfree if I have to translate my personality into Russian. So that's one thing. Another thing is that my assertiveness and my tactility are more a product of me in my relationship with the arts and my relationship with philosophy and the way I love than Russianness. In some ways, if you try to place it, it's probably more South European than Russian. I have more North European than South European elements in me, but I have South European elements in me in the sense that I can be sort of like, I'm never majorly bossy, but I'm trivially bossy. Like I'll never tell you how to live your life, but I will tell you to sit down or stand up. right? If we know each other in person, I can walk into the room and say, "Everybody, sit." But I don't think that's Russianness coming through. Um, I think that that's derivable from other layers of who I am. Um, so the best thing to say is that I used to be in denial about my Russian element. Um, so when I was like sort of 21, how Russian are you? Would have gone a bit, not because I thought Russia was, but because I'm just not. Now I'm more open, of course, to the Russian element framing me. I experience it maybe as something that sort of shades elements of who I am rather than constituting these elements themselves. And I also recognize that for me, it's not something you can clearly state. You can only keep exploring what it is. And I'm always open to exploring what is that Russian element. But if you're going to give a pie chart, I'd probably put it at, you know, 10%. But that's and also I'm not somebody who buys into the sort of trashy progressive fascism and says that Russian culture is sort of trashy or Russian language is trashy. No, I'm sorry, Russian language is no more trashy than German or French or Ukrainian. Um, it's an important European language. Russian high culture is an important part of European high culture. You can't get out of that, no matter how many genocidal wars they start. Um, so I don't have that kind of aversion. Then, in terms of the high culture, I'm much more drawn to the literature than to the music. I rate Shostakovich below his rating in the music world. I rate Rachmaninoff far below his rating in the music world. Um, I rate Tchaikovsky far below his rating in the music world. I rate Stravinsky on par. So I have sort of blasphemous views about Russian composers. I have blasphemous views about Russian performers too. I don't think Richter and Gilels are great pianists. They're pianists with great facilities. I'm much bigger on the literature. But that again doesn't, I mean, appreciating the magical completeness of the short stories of Chekhov is not, I'm sorry, that's really not very Russian. So it's something that shades me in a lovely way, beautiful way, and it's about 10%. So sort of the average person coming across me online would naturally assume I'm way more Russian than I am psychologically. Um, that's Dostoevsky I rate very, very highly. Um, so that's a bit on that. Maybe I can be more articulate about it in the future, but it's almost an important thing to be not very articulate about it because it's subtle how that shading occurs in me. This is fascinating how these layers work. And then don't forget that when I moved to Israel, I fairly rapidly, as you often do at that age, converted to Hebrew. Um, so it's not that I spent when I came to the UK, I was speaking Hebrew um, as my preferred language over Russian. So it's not that I even spent 12 years full time speaking Russian. It's just 9 full time. Um, of course, there'll be more interesting things to say about that than I've said now, but we're going to wind ourselves up. Beautiful community, thank you so much for being here. And we're all done. We owe Adam Ragusea an email, but otherwise we're done. Lots of love, everybody. See you soon.